something goes wrong, I can still, yeah, it's already recording, so it works. So let's wait 3 more minutes and then we can start. All right, we are on time, so I'll get started. My name is Valmir. I am a test automation engineer in the Plan team. And this is a AMA session about the GitLab end-to-end testing framework. The idea is that we'll have a brief explanation of the end-to-end testing framework in the beginning, and then we'll open for questions. In the document that I'm sharing, which is also available in the on Google Calendar, the link for this document, you will find also some documents that we recommend reading if you want to know more about the end-to-end testing framework. And there are also 2 videos available. One of them was a training that was done in the past about the QA framework, and the other one was a presentation in a conference. So the explanation, in this link here, we have the GitLab QA framework, which is under GitLab CE QA/QA. And then we have all these subdirectories. These are the ones that I will briefly explain. So I will not talk about all of them, but at least some of them that I think are important for you to know. So we have a directory called Git, which is used for resources creation via the command line interface. And so in this directory, you will find some classes with methods that can create commits or can push to a specific repository as a user would do through the command line user interface, through the command line interface. So it's basically for us to simulate these kind of actions while running end-to-end testing. Then we have the page objects directory. This is where we have the page directory. This is where we have our page objects. These are abstractions of web elements and the methods that can be performed in the page, like filling a form and submitting the form, things like that. Then we have the resources directory. This is where we have some classes that we use for resources fabrication. This is how we call it. And a resource can be anything that you can do on GitLab, like an issue can be a resource, an epic can be a resource, label can be a resource. And in the resource directory, you will find ways to fabricate these resources via the graphical user interface, but also via the API. We always recommend you to use the resource fabrication via API if the resource that you are going to create is just needed as a precondition for the test, because fabricating resources via API is faster and it's also more reliable than going through the graphical user interface for doing that. And then you use the graphical user interface just for testing what you want to test in the browser. There's also the resource directory, which has some runtime configurations, such as browser capabilities and some logging things as well. Then in the specs/features/browser UI is where the graphical user interface test files live. And this is where we have the tests themselves. And we separate the tests by their group, by their DevOps stage. So we have tests for manage, for plan, create, verify, and so on and so forth. And finally, we have the support directory where we have things like retry.rb to rerun failed specs to avoid failures due to things like flakiness. And we have also waiter.rb as a helper for waiting for elements to be present and things like that. So as I have already mentioned, these are some resources that you can go through if you want to have more understanding about the framework. And now we can start with the questions. So I will, Peter, would you like to verbalize your question?
Yes, thank you. Hi. I'm Peter, I'm backend engineer on the monitor team, and my question is, I've noticed that we have the project GitLab QA and the directory QA inside the GitLab source code, and I wonder what's the difference and which one to use actually locally and or on CI, and where to which projects should we submit our MRs when improving framework code.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Peter. So the answer for your question is that there are differences. What we have in this link that I mentioned here before, where we have the test framework itself, is where we have all these things that I mentioned here, like these resources, runtime, the spec files, and things like that. This other project here, GitLab-QA, is more about the infrastructure that is used for running the tests themselves. I know that we have more QA, test automation engineers in the call, so if you want to add more to that. But the main difference is that what lives inside /QA/QA are all the files used for creating the tests themselves, and what lives in this other repository is more like the infrastructure for running the tests on CI. Correct me if I'm wrong, anyone else from the team.
I can help fill in here. So the naming convention is in that great. So thanks for patience on people. GitLab QA itself is the orchestrator, and it's used for orchestrating tests that is outside a product, for example, Geo. But the main test, the functional test, is in the QA directory, because the test should live with the source code. We have some discussions of renaming GitLab QA to GitLab QA Orchestrator, so it's more clear. And also, it's also being used by some of our customers after they upgrade their GitLab instance. They will want to run some smoke tests, and they could just run it by the orchestrator directly. They don't have to check out GitLab CE or GitLab EE source code, because we ship these tests as part of a gem, and they can just pull down GitLab QA, the project, and run a set of smoke tests or whatever tests against their GitLab instance. And there are tests that needs, for example, 2 instances of GitLab, which you're in the orchestrator as well, because you need to set up a primary site of GitLab 1 and then a secondary site of GitLab 2. Those tests will have to reside outside of the code, outside of the product itself, with your perspective of testing is outside, and those tests will live in GitLab QA Orchestrator.
Thanks for jumping in, Mac. Does it answer your questions, Peter?
Yes, thank you. I've also noticed that there are there's some common code between the two places. So, for example, I'm about to improve the shellout code, and I wonder where should I improve that code, in the QA project or in the QA folder, because they seem quite different.
I don't know if I got exactly what is your question.
So so in both places I see code which is similar. For example, some helper code in order to shell out, for example. And right now I am about to improve some of that code, and I'm not sure which version to improve. So version, I mean, and which place should I improve it, from the QA folder, or should I contribute to the GitLab QA project?
Yeah, I was not aware of this duplication, so we would need to look into it. I would say that if it's something related to the tasks themselves, you should change on CE or EE, depending on what is the improvement that you want to make. But if it's really about the orchestration, then maybe it should go to the GitLab QA project. What do you think, Mac?
Yeah, if you have an issue for it, Peter, please let me know. But I believe this is where you're pointing to, right? The Docker shellout RB. Do you know where the other duplication lies inside the CE project?
I think it's also shellout RB. Let me check.
Oh, inside CE and EE, correct?
Yes. It's there. It's QA service, but the intention of that code is similar, but the implementation is different. So I wonder where to put the improvements.
Yeah, so if you just put in a doc, we'll run with it. At the scale of how we're growing, I appreciate all the patience. Just for context, other enterprise companies have a 1-to-5 ratio of developers to test automation engineers. We're at roughly 1-to-18. So it's impossible for us to know all the nooks and crannies and edge cases of all the framework right now. And if you find anything, please let us know. We're working on making the counterpart mapping better. And in some areas it's even 1-to-22. And in worst cases, there's none. We're working on improving that, and I want to say thank you for your patience.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks also for wanting to contribute with the project. It's really appreciated. The other question we have is from Grant. Would you like to verbalize your question, Grant?
Yeah, sure. I just thought maybe this is the best place to ask. Through the interview and through obviously joining and running again this week, I've got it running on my local machine, but I just wanted to ask to see if this was the easiest way to do it. What I currently do is I have a GDK running, and then I would try and run the test by having to build a local QA Docker, or trying to make the bin QA executable work on my machine. I've had success after some trial and error there, but I just wanted to know what was the easiest way to run those tests that you're developing locally, and yeah, the most convenient.
Thanks for the question. I would say that using the GDK would be the preferable place for you to write and run the tests. I had some performance issues while using the GDK locally in comparison to Docker. But the main point of using the GDK is that sometimes when you're writing a new test, you need to change something in the view of the application, for instance, for adding a specific attribute that the test will read. And if you do it through the GDK, it will recompile the code and the new class will be available for you in the application. While if you use Docker, you won't have the chance to do that. So for running the tests on Docker, it works, but if you need to change something in the application that needs to be recompiled, then you will need to use the GDK. Does it answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm doing. I asked just to make sure that I'm on the right track. So yeah, that's pretty much how I'm doing it right now. So yeah, that's good.
I would just add to this that in general, if you want to have fast test execution and a fast setup, you would normally just run a Docker image, as Walmer said, and run the bin.qa folder executable to run a specific test that you created. But as he also mentioned, like if you don't want to write a test on your own, but just want to test something, there is also the GitLab QA gem that you can as well use. But in general, like as a test automated test writer, you would normally, if you don't want to change anything in the view, I normally use a Docker image and just run it against a Docker image. In the only exception, if I ever want to improve something on a view or maybe change something.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tommy. I don't see any other questions, so please feel free to ask more questions if you have any. One thing that I could mention while we don't have any other new question is that we are working on improving the end-to-end testing framework. Some things that we are iterating on are improving the documentation to have some more like step-by-step guides on how to use the framework and how to write the test and how to update tests and things like that. We are also defining some style guides that we want to follow. And I remember also that Marc Lapierre mentioned that the author of Capybara framework is also willing to contribute with improving the framework itself using some best practices of using Capybara, since this is the library that we use together with the framework. So it's really, these links here, they are very, very valuable if you want to know like what are the guidelines that we are using, and if you don't understand exactly how page objects works or how resource fabrication works, these are the places you have to go.
Also, one thing that in the documentation is very well explained, but is currently in the process of being implemented much more and much more thoroughly, is actually the usage of API, because currently a lot of the resources we create are created by using the UI interface, which makes the tests a lot slower. So in general, if you're helping out or want to write tests, you will see that at many resources, there will be the ability to create through the API the resource itself, and in other instances there won't. So don't be surprised if some things work slower because they have to be done through the UI. It is still an iterative process.
Yes.
Hey, I've got a question. So given the speed of of iteration right from the development team. Do you guys find that maintaining your test automation is challenging because the application is changing so frequently, or do you have any tips or tricks on how you do that?
In general, I would say this is an often asked question, but if you look at the testing pyramid and if you look at how many tests in general a UI-based test, like how much UI-based tests you should have in like such a huge project like this, there is a correlation where you can see that UI tests should not be that many in general. Like you should be focusing much more on unit tests, which we are currently doing anyway. Like every developer is writing his unit tests on everything he does. So the testing, the test coverage in general is not bad. UI tests should be done if they are needed, and it is harder because of the just the sheer amount of people that are working currently on the test automation framework, as well as on the sheer amount of code that is pushed every day through such a huge team. But this is important to keep in mind. It's just that there shouldn't be that many UI tests anyway. I hope I made that clear.
Yeah, it was a great answer. So what about, and this may be a little off topic, but about performance testing, do you guys take the same type of approach, or are you guys responsible for the performance testing of the application?
I can take that one. We have an enablement team now that's dedicated to memory and other large encompassing performance. But we do take into account functional performance in each area. An example for this is what Ramya's team, Tommy and Valmy, are working on, is that we have tests around big merge requests, an issue with a lot of discussions, a lot of labels, and I will link an epic that tracks two tracks of work that's directly related to the framework here, which is the coverage track and also the efficiency track. In those epics, you can see we're trying to backlog fill performance tests and also security tests like cross-site scripting and etc. In addition to that, I do want to go back and answer the first question is, do we see challenges in moving fast? It's a challenge, but it's a good challenge because we're doing it differently than other companies. An effective iteration that we made earlier was to remove the requirements of writing test plans. Those are something that tends to get carried over from quality engineering processes in enterprise companies. And it has proven to be more of a backlog lagging task because you have to create an issue for test plans. Sometimes the MR and feature is small. The cost of paperwork in creating a test plan doesn't benefit the outcome. So what we do here is we do not require test plans by default anymore, but we do want to move into a test planning iteration closer to product requirements. So we added a testing section in the issue template. So product managers and engineers and test automation engineers should be collaborating earlier on what to test. And we are making progress there. It's not perfect yet. And there's a section to discuss testing in the MRs as well. We will require test plans on big changes like upgrading to Rails 6 in the future, upgrading to Ruby, or rolling out big cross-cutting changes. Like, and a good example of this is when we migrated to GCP, like we had test plans, and like it was like a rehearsal project that we rehearsed for like 4 months. Like Dan, I think he's on the call, also participated. So those are the cases where we would need a test plan. Does that help clarify?
Yeah, that's awesome. And I just want to say, as someone who sells and demos the product all the time, you guys do a great job. So I really appreciate your work.
Oh, thank you. There's still a lot of work to be done. And the credit all goes to the team. I'm just a facilitator here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question and thanks for taking it up, Mac. Nicole, would you like to verbalize your question?
So, do we have any older areas of code before we requested everyone make unit tests for their code as they push it that we need to go back and have groups revisit? Like, as a product manager, is there anything I should be watching out for to make sure we've got good coverage?
I know we have code coverage reports somewhere, and I think there are links for this. I think in this one, let me just check. Coverage. Yeah, so in the document that I clicked, we have this session, are end-to-end tests needed? And then we have links for both CE and EE code coverage reports. I think this should be the first place to look into to see which parts of the code are or not covered by unit tests, I would say. It's taking a bit long for it to render. Yeah, but yeah, as we can see here, this is the test coverage report for C. And here, yeah, it's still rendering for EE. So does it answer your question?
Yep.
Nicole, sorry to jump in here. I do appreciate you bringing this up because we do a pretty good job adding tests with every bug fix. That's good and bad. Good is we have a lot of tests. The bad is that the execution time tends to grow, and there are certainly duplications that we can make it leaner. We don't have a big cross-cutting effort to groom this right now, but I think we should revisit them. Maybe I think an experimentation we could do is start it in one team in one area first to see where we can go and groom things. An iteration that we made to improve this is now we, in addition to removing test plans, we are adding the counterpart test automation engineers to the reviewer roulette, where there are changes made to the tests. So this will increase the awareness on our part. We still need to learn what's are all the tests. There are like 5,000, almost 6,000 tests in the spec features. There's even more in the unit tests. So building up that knowledge is happening now. It will take a while to get there where, say, a counterpart test automation engineer knows exactly where to remove, what to remove when a new test comes in. But I think it's a collaborative effort with the product managers as well. And it's also important that we shouldn't go in and happily clean out things, because every bug fix goes in with a test. And if we remove something unintentionally, that's like removing a brick in the wall, right? And then things may come crumbling down. So we would love to tone it down, but we'll probably have to do it with caution.
Yeah, thanks for that. One thing that I would like to mention as well, that is an effort that the quality department is doing, is working on some end-to-end tests that are quarantined. So we are working on, so we have some tests that sometimes they are flaky, they fail intermittently, so they are not very reliable. And when we face this kind of issues, we quarantine the tests so that they don't pollute the merge requests with like false negative results and things like that. And we are iterating on making them more reliable, making it more reliable to interact with web elements through the graphical user interface. And also we are, as I mentioned in the beginning, if we need specific resource to be created for a specific test as a precondition for the test to run, then we, instead of creating the resources via the graphical user interface, we try to do this via the APIs or the CLIs, because this is more reliable and a lot more faster as well. Stan, would you like to verbalize your question?
Sure, just simply, and I have my opinions, but I'm curious to hear what other people think about where do you think the biggest test gaps we have right now? And I see our clock is ticking.
Would you like to take this one, Mac?
Sure. So from a high-level perspective, like ops CI/CD, one, because we only have 2 engineers and no managers there. So like the visibility is low there. The other increasing of test gaps we can do is always like in depth, because that's our bread and butter and performance. I think we need to improve production-like data in our performance test beds, and that is a recurring theme that I'm seeing. So those would be like the 3 areas of highlight that I would point out. I'm curious to hear what Stan thinks as well, because he's boots on the ground in the front line. So feel free to let us know if there are other areas of improvements.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about it, but you know, I think generally, I think to the point about unit tests, I think the developers do a great job of writing unit tests. It's just that there's always another edge case that you haven't considered because, you know, maybe we have bad data in our database, and you know, you haven't thought about that, or you know, customers are upgrading from one version to another, and during this time frame, we're in this kind of, you know, different state which we don't completely test. So it's the things that like that are harder to test. It's not to say we can't do it, but I mean, I think to your point about production like data, I mean that's absolutely true. It's like there's a lot of stuff in our database that is strange or not valid. We've added, for example, validations after the fact that valid data was in there, so now like existing models and things like that aren't actually validating, and so if you try to save like a record, like a project, it actually doesn't save because it's the validations don't pass. So there's lots of those kind of things that happen in our system that are harder to test, and you can argue that you really want to clean that up and be proactive by cleaning it up rather than try to account for every edge case. But I do think that there are things like that. The gaps that are there, and if you look at all the priority bugs that we had in the last 2 weeks, they were mainly from things like that, you know, gaps, and like we didn't expect, you know, a pipeline schedule not to have an owner, you know, like things like that. It's like someone probably could have considered that, but it wasn't obvious from the get-go.
Right, I echo that, because this ties in with the theme of more iterative test planning. Because we can sit in a room for a week and plan all the cases that we want, but that's not how we work here at GitLab. So lightweight test planning and more realistic test data, according to what you said, yes, those are the ones that bites us, because we didn't think of it, and the only place right now is production that is realistic. And I'm glad that we have Canary and we have pre-prod now, but yeah, we need to make progress on making more realistic, dirty data in production available for engineers.
We are almost over time, so I will read the question that Christopher asked on the chat, which is where to start. And I would say that you should start by reading the documentation, which is linked here, and it's the source of truth for what we have in terms of end-to-end testing. So I really appreciate that you took the time to be here with us in this meeting. The idea is that we will, by reading the questions and answers from this meeting, will improve the things that we have. So thanks a lot. I will also upload the recording of this meeting later so that people that couldn't attend will be able to watch it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Great work.
Thank you all for attending.